The name of Ludwig van Beethoven will be among the most famous as long as people are still listening to music. His unquenchable spirit and pure joy in creating music are present in every note of every bar of every piece of music he wrote. He didn't simply write great music, he changed music forever. Beethoven used every single aspect of musical construction, not just to manipulate them into a musical idea, but to conform them to his will. Beethoven was able to take the smallest musical idea and turn it into a masterpiece that becomes an overwhelming experience. After all, his Fifth Symphony, which we're hearing in the background, is made up almost entirely of variations on 4 notes and is considered one of the most powerful orchestral works ever written. Most historians divide Beethoven's creative life into 3 distinct periods called, brilliantly, the early, middle, and late periods. Each period shows a change in Beethoven's musical style, the last 2 brought on by the personal tragedies of his life. Beethoven's early style shows a composer finding his own way in a musical world dominated by Mozart and Haydn. Though his earliest works were imitations of these great composers' work, it wasn't long before he developed his own style. In fact, Haydn was Beethoven's teacher, and the younger man found Haydn to be a bit stodgy and the two didn't get along very well. It's now well known that Beethoven was confident, brash, ambitious, and determined. He was also cocky, opinionated, and proud. He also had no boundaries when it came to speaking his mind. As an example of one of Beethoven's earliest works, here's the beginning of the 3rd movement of a piano sonata he wrote in 1893 at the age of 13. That was the beginning of the 3rd movement of a piano sonata written when Beethoven was 13. Let's compare that to the last movement of Beethoven's first published piano sonata from 1795. You can see the vast differences in those 2 pieces. Even though Beethoven was writing the kinds of pieces other composers were writing, like piano sonatas, symphonies, and concertos, he was doing it in his own way. Because of his incredible self-belief, he found his own way quickly. Let's hear some of the music from Beethoven's early period, which lasted until about 1802. Here's part of the lovely 2nd movement from his Piano Concerto No. 1. Haydn and Mozart were masters of the string quartet. By Beethoven's time, it was a genre that a composer had to master if he was going to be taken seriously. Needless to say, he excelled at it. Beethoven's String Quartet No. 3 was written about 1800. Beside the string quartet, the other musical form that could make or break a composer was the symphony. Beethoven's First Symphony was premiered in 1800 and caused a stir because of its opening chords. Here's what the audience heard. That doesn't sound like a big deal to us now, but in Beethoven's time it was considered very harsh and dissonant and inappropriate for the opening of a symphony. It was one of the things that showed the direction Beethoven was going. The rest of the symphony is joyful and brimming with confidence. Beethoven's First Symphony was well received by some, disliked by others, but it certainly made them take notice. Another piece from Beethoven's early period that really got people's attention was the Piano Sonata No. 8, known as the Pathetique, written in 1798 and 99. Its solemn opening chords set the mood as an introduction. That introduction does not prepare us for what's coming. The second movement of the Pathetique Sonata gave us another famous melody. That was a taste of what was coming in just a few years. In 1801, Beethoven wrote what would become one of the most famous piano pieces ever composed. The Sonata No. 14 in C-sharp minor came to be known as the Moonlight Sonata because of that gorgeous, haunting music in the first movement. It was unheard of that the entire opening movement of a piano sonata would be slow. But Beethoven was making his intentions clear. Put your expectations aside. Here comes Beethoven. The final movement of the Moonlight is also something that really gets your attention. The revolution seemed to be building, and Beethoven had already mastered his craft and the musical forms that were established in the world. He was making his presence felt and creating music of great uniqueness and originality. He was also considered rude and arrogant by many and standoffish by others. His social life was hardly thriving, but his whole life was about to change. In 1802, in the village of Heiligenstadt, Beethoven faced the most intense personal crisis of his life. He'd been losing his hearing for several years. Confronting deafness, he was advised by his doctor to escape from the noise of Vienna, and the composer retreated to the charming village, one of his favorite spots. In those days at Heiligenstadt, Beethoven made up his mind to meet his adversary head-on. In the most important letter of Beethoven's life, he wrote, "Oh, you men who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me. Reflect now that for 6 years I have been a hopeless case, aggravated by senseless physicians, cheated year after year in the hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady. Oh, how harshly was I repulsed by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing, and yet it was impossible for me to say to men, "Speak louder, shout, for I am deaf." How could I possibly admit such an infirmity in the one sense which should have been more perfect in me than in others? I cannot do it. Therefore forgive me when you see me draw back when I would gladly mingle with you. Such incidents brought me to the verge of despair, but little more and I would have put an end to my life. Only art it was that withheld me, and so I endured this wretched existence, truly wretched. Patience, it is said, that I must now choose for my guide. I have done so. I hope my determination will remain firm to endure it until it please the inexorable fates to break the thread. Perhaps I shall get better, perhaps not. I am prepared. With this new determination, the composer responded in the only way he could. He wrote music. There's so much variety in the music of this period, but what stands out most are the works that grab you and refuse to let go. Here are some examples. Music from the first movement of the Sonata number 23, the Appassionata. The third movement from his Piano Concerto number 3. The first movement from the String Quartet number 10. The first movement from the Waldstein Sonata. One of Beethoven's most celebrated piano pieces was also written during this period. The Fiorelisa was a piece written in a very short time, but it's in the repertoire of every pianist of all ages and levels. During Beethoven's middle period, though, two works stand head and shoulders above the rest. In 1803, Beethoven, impressed by the apparent worldly goodwill of Napoleon Bonaparte, decided to write a symphony in his honor. But before the work was performed, Beethoven heard that Napoleon had crowned himself Emperor of France. The composer flew into a rage and violently scratched Napoleon's name from the title page and wrote under it, "In memory of a great man." In the symphony, Beethoven created music of incredible breadth, depth of emotion, and overwhelming dramatic intensity. The whirlwind of ideas piled up and thrust out at the audience must have been pretty overwhelming. Even those who recognized it as a work of genius still couldn't have completely understood what Beethoven had done. Though slow to catch on, soon Beethoven's inner vision would shake the musical foundations of the world and cause people to see things in a new and better way. Here's the opening of the first movement. In 1807 and 08, Beethoven would write one of the works that would make him immortal. first movement of the Symphony No. 5 is made up of 4 notes repeated over and over in a variety of ways. It doesn't sound like much on paper, but it shakes the world with every performance. The composer purportedly said that this movement was fate knocking at the door. It's easy to believe that. If Beethoven's music stopped here and he never wrote anything else, he would still have been one of the greatest composers who ever lived. When we move from Beethoven's middle period to his late, starting in about 1812, we find music that could come from no other place than the depths of his soul. He was completely deaf. He couldn't hear his own works. He knew in his head and his heart what the music sounded like, but he would never hear it played. It's the music that tugs at the soul and touches the heart that really stands out in this period. The first movement from the String Quartet No. 14. The third movement from the Piano Sonata No. 31. It was music like nothing that had been heard before, and it opened the way for the next era in music, the Romantic era. Composers felt free to express their emotions and open their hearts. But we're not going to end this discussion of Beethoven without ending with the symphony that changed the symphony forever. The ninth is a profound statement of everything that mankind is and strives to achieve. We can relate to its pain and its struggle with the sometimes overwhelming difficulties with which life confronts us, even as we reach out to grab hold of its message of triumph. The Ninth Symphony leads us on a journey from darkness to light, beginning with an intense statement of despair and ending with an overwhelming proclamation of joy. Beethoven made his intentions known right from the beginning of the work. It was the cry of despair from a spirit that had known a lot of pain. It reaches into us and pulls out our deepest emotions. We have no choice but to respond. As the work goes on, though, our feeling of despair gradually changes. With determination comes hope. We move through this musical world thinking that it doesn't have to be like this. But Beethoven left the best for last. Although it echoes the anguish of the opening, it doesn't last long, as the overwhelmingly famous melody Beethoven created, a melody known by people who love classical music, those who are indifferent to classical music, and even by those who hate classical music. It changes everything that has come so far. It isn't enough, though, for Beethoven to dispel grief with a gorgeous and uplifting melody. He has to make sure it changes us forever after. It was the first time a composer had ever used a chorus in a symphony. By the end, the Symphony No. 9 has become a biography of Beethoven's existence. Every note of every bar, of every page, of every piece of music he wrote has led to this. It's a statement to the world of a life of triumph arising out of loss and pain. Beethoven had changed the world.